U.S. Modernist Radio is part of DesignNetwork.org, exclusive architecture and design podcasts reaching creative listeners worldwide.
I'm Allison Arias. I'm the Director of Communications at Replica, a data platform for the built environment, and you are listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. Remember our show a little while back on Seattle Modernism with Jim Olson of Olson Kundig? Well, before Jim Olson and Tom Kundig came along, the Pacific Northwest had architect Paul Hayden Kirk creating amazing modernist houses. Joining us today is Dale Kutzera, the author of Paul Hayden Kirk and the Rise of Northwest Modern. Later on, we'll travel in time back to 1961 in the Rat Pack. Martin, daughter of one of the coolest dudes ever, singer and actor and producer Deana Martin. And now, proud of his ties to another famous crooner, here is Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Hey, thanks, Tom. In mid-1961, my mom just couldn't believe it. Her son was likely to be born, plus or minus a few days, on the most celebrated holiday in December 12th.
Huh?
Sorry, Christmas. Sorry, Hanukkah.
Uh-huh.
Ann Smart was a devoted Frank Sinatra fan, and Frankie's birthday was on the 12th. It was a cause for celebration for her for decades. She loved him from when he was just a member of the Tommy Dorsey Band in 1940. Growing up without a father and with an overprotective mother, my mom still managed with her best friend V to make it to Frank's appearances all up and down the East Coast. That was a big deal, as going Thelma and Louise by themselves was an act of bravery in those days.
I'll bet.
My mom later got a job with WPTF Radio in Raleigh, the largest AM station in the state, where she was on the air several times a week and could listen to Frank, Deana Martin, Sammy Davis, Tony Bennett, Perry Como, Andy Williams, and a host of other crooners every day. Then came 1961, and the Smart Child was indeed born on Frank Sinatra's birthday.
I think there was a star in the East. I believe that was New Jersey. 3 wise guys showed up from Hoboken.
My mom was thrilled, and sure enough, within a few years, my mom put me in the Raleigh Boy Choir, which I remember most for the graham crackers and juice they served us, or withheld from us like crack, to keep everyone quiet between songs. We were just angelic until a few years later when our voices sound more like hungry, injured birds, also on crack.
Yeah.
My musical career took twists and turns, much like driving drunk on a flooded mountain road at night, and by 15, I tapped out. It just wasn't my thing. And by then, my mom had lost interest in that particular encouragement. Now she wanted me to be a lawyer.
Of course.
Besides, Frank Sinatra was in his 60s and never sounded better. When he died 20 years later, just a few years before she did, I saw her crying and attempted to sing My Way, which did not go well at all, but we both ended up laughing.
That's the point.
U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin, and by Modernist realtor Angela Roll.
In a timeless adventure that we are completely making up, realtor Angela Roll grew up in Estonia, the daughter of a former ambassador wrongly accused of spying on next-door Lithuania. He was cleared, it turned out, because Estonia only has 6 spies, and everybody pretty much knows who they are. After a night of partying with Le Corbusier's cousin, Boozy Corbusier, Angela took the ferry across the Gulf to Finland, causing an international incident involving a little red dress, a wood-turning lathe, the Finnish Coast Guard, and a $2,400 bar tab she signed as Norman Foster. Angela escaped the resulting media frenzy on a train to Denmark in the company of international man of mystery Eric of Aarhus, whom she later married and eventually moved to North Carolina, the Denmark of the South, to become a real estate agent. Specializing in modernist houses, Angela advises buyers and sellers on everything from appropriate renovation to shipping a wood-turning lathe from Helsinki. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL, or call her at 919-995-0550.
Thanks, Tom. Architect Paul Hayden Kirk's houses and buildings in Seattle are as prized today as they were 50 years ago. Despite limitations from polio, he got his architecture degree from the University of Washington and by 1939 started his own practice, designing homes for his older builder brother, Blair. That's a lot of B's. Projects include the Magnolia branch of the Seattle Public Library, the Japanese Presbyterian Church, the French Administration Building at Washington State University, the Edward Meany Hall at the University of Washington, the IBM Office Building in Spokane, and the Alexander Graham Bell Elementary School in Kirkland, among many more. Kirk was a rock star in design, with over 60 articles in national architectural publications. You can find most of these in the U.S. Modernist Library online. Kirk paved the way for architects like Jim Olson, Tom Kundig, Gordon Walker, Rick Sundberg, and a special group of women we'll learn about today. Author Dale Kutzera studied journalism and film at the University of Washington and then worked as a screenwriter, with credits including Strange Frequency, Without a Trace, and the satire Military Intelligence and You. He won the Carl Sauter Screenwriting Award and has written books about writing books, as well as the sci-fi Andy McBean series. Welcome, Dale.
Hello, George. Nice to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. What's life like in Seattle? I know you have a few thoughts on livability out there.
Well, Seattle has changed a lot over the years and a great deal over the last just even 10 years. It really started to change when Amazon moved to the South Lake Union area. Their growth, of course, has fueled just a remarkable growth in Seattle. I mean, we led the nation probably for the last 10 years in the number of cranes standing over our city, one building after another being built. Of course, we've added hundreds of thousands of people to the population of the area, and that's had a lot of knock-on effects. Knock-on effects in terms of housing costs and homelessness and also just the kind of architecture that's being built today. Very different from Paul Kirk's day.
Now, are you getting that epidemic of these 5-story gray buildings that get put up that are wrapped around a parking deck? We've got dozens of those in this state. They all look the same and they're terrible.
Yeah, up here it's interesting. When I moved back, I started to see all these buildings that were covered in what is essentially a cement board panel system. And they're just big boards. They can be, 3 by 5 feet or 4 by 6 and into a grid of metal brackets. And it was very strange to see all these townhomes and apartment buildings. Usually I think they call it 5/1 construction up here, where it's 5 wood-framed floors of housing over the reinforced concrete base. And of course, all those 5 floors, they're all being built to the absolute allowable square footage because everyone wants to maximize their square footage. So these are all big boxy buildings, and they're all covered with this, cement panels. Of course, I think it looks terrible. I think it makes the whole building look like it's covered with painted tar paper in a way.
Do they have windows?
Oh, yeah. There are windows, and some of them have little balconies, but the desire to cut up the interiors into as many studio apartments as possible leads to a real kind of cookie-cutter exterior. So there's really not a lot of real great architectural moves to any of these buildings. And of course, the fact that they're wood frame construction means that the grid they're based on is very different from a reinforced concrete building or a steel building that might have a better span of space and interior space. There's a lot of beautiful kind of office buildings going up in South Lake Union because, of course, a different building code applies there. But if you're, surrounding downtown, you're just seeing 5, 6, 7, 8-story apartment buildings, boxy, big, and all looking the same.
And where is South Lake Union? Is that a part of Seattle, or is it a different municipality?
No, South Lake, Seattle is an interesting city. It's a very skinny city. It's basically wedged between the Puget Sound on one side and Lake Washington on the other. And connecting Lake Washington to the Puget Sound is the Montlake Cut that was dug, 100 years ago. And that connected Lake Washington to Lake Union. So Lake Union is just north of downtown. And on the south shore of Lake Union, which used to be a lot of light industrial type businesses, all that area has been kind of it was rezoned. It was basically bought up, and all those businesses have been basically kicked out, and the buildings transformed into new tech offices. And every tech company you can imagine has an office down there. It's quite a remarkable transformation in just the last 10 or 15 years.
Wow.
Well, let's get in our time machine then, Dale, and go back to a simpler, gentler time where the architecture was more interesting. Tell us about Paul Kirk.
Well, it is kind of a wistful visit down memory lane. It's the Northwest that I grew up in, and it was a real booming post-World War II land where the economy was picking up, and of course, the housing market was picking up as well. And Paul Hayden Kirk had great timing. He had the good fortune of getting out of architecture school in the late 1930s and doing his apprentice work and setting up his own office as a young man, right when a lot of defense money was coming into the area related to World War II. And of course, the Puget Sound is home to Boeing, and it was home to shipyards and a lot of industry that was important to the war effort. It was also home to some major naval bases. So a lot of federal money started to flood into the Puget Sound area, and that just picked up and enabled Paul Kirk to really have a nice entry into the world of architecture. It also helped that his dad, Spencer Kirk Sr., was an interior designer. He had worked in Utah where he lived and grew up, and then he had moved here and became a salesman of furniture and then opened his own shop, basically decorating a lot of new housing projects and commercial projects. So Paul had a really kind of I think he had a great relationship with his dad, and his dad had, what Paul Kirk called a sensitivity to all things related to kind of color and texture and light and design. So when Paul got out of school, I think his dad was able to recommend him to some clients, and that really got Paul's career off to a good start because he did a couple of very interesting Beaux Arts style houses, 39, 40. And then through the war years, because he had polio and would not serve and could not serve in uniform, he worked basically building housing, a lot of defense worker housing in Seattle. And then after Seattle, he teamed up with another UW grad, a guy named James Chiarelli. And from 45 to 50, they really did some of the first mid-century modern houses in the Pacific Northwest. And were lots of glass, shed roofs, just really terrific flowing spaces, often all on one floor. And, it was a time when the average cost of a house in the Pacific Northwest, in the King County area, the median price was twice the median income. And I remember looking that up when I was doing the book and some other research. And of course, you compare that to today, where the average cost of a house is 10 times the median income.
Yeah.
So, where it used to take only 2 years worth of income to buy a house in Seattle, now it takes 10 years worth of the median income to buy a house. So you can imagine that really it was a great bonanza. They had built the 520 and I-90 bridges across Lake Washington, and that opened up the east side, Bellevue, Redmond, Issaquah, all those places. It was just virgin land. It was all farmland, beet farms, and all kinds of things. And so the acreage was cheap, and people could live on the other side, on the east side, as they call it, across the lake. And the average college grad, the average professional could buy a piece of land and hire an architect and build a house and do it for probably, $10,000 or $15,000.
How was the reception, Dale, of the community to modernist architecture? Did they like it, or did they get out their pitchforks and torches like some other places?
In talking to some of the old timers in researching this book and some old clients and so forth, there were a lot of cases where the previous generation was scratching their heads as this new strange-looking boxy thing was going up, down the block. But in most part, it was really embraced because it was a more professional crowd, often coming out of the University of Washington and often working in the the industries here in Seattle, Boeing in particular, and a lot of the medical and educational communities. They were all really open to it. And I think part of that was that Paul Kirk and the other Northwest modernists that kind of came after him were really marrying that kind of clean modernism that we all love with the use of wood and a kind of woodsier style of design that had a lot of Japanese influences to it. So it was very interesting. It was very clean, but at the same time, it was rather warm and very kind of human in that regard. It wasn't the real clinical kind of stuff that you might, someone might look at a Richard Neutra house and think, wow, that's really so precise and machine-like that there's really no warmth there. I find them beautiful, but some, may see that as being a little too sterile. But with Kirk, and the use of wood, and he always insisted that his wood be stained and not painted. And so that, I think, really warmed up modernism for the Pacific Northwest.
Now, your book includes the story of 5 Seattle women credited with promoting Northwest modernism. Are any of them still around?
Sadly, no, none of them are still around. But it is interesting to look back and to do the research and to see how modernism was embraced in the Northwest. And it kept coming back, coincidentally, to several women. The road to being an architect was probably not open to them at that time. And yet they were really essential to kind of spreading the gospel of modernism here in the Northwest. You have to consider that in the Pacific Northwest, back in the day, it's like the center of the world now for a lot of people. But back in the day, it was a very secluded off to one, the far upper left corner of the nation. People on the East Coast and in, Los Angeles, they really didn't think much of Seattle.
It was basically just Boeing, right? And the Space Needle and the World's Fair and, all the tech and Starbucks hadn't come along yet.
No, none of that had come along. And before the World's Fair, I don't think many people had learned about Seattle. I think that before the World's Fair, a lot of people probably thought Seattle was somewhere near Alaska. Yeah. They probably couldn't even find it on a map. They knew that there was a lot of airplanes, and the population of the city grew a lot after World War II because there was a lot of people came through Seattle on their way to the Pacific Theater. And when they got out of the service, many of them were let out of the service here in Seattle, and many of them stayed. So World War II itself was a big boom. It kind of helped people discover how beautiful the region is and how idyllic it could be compared to a lot of other parts of the country that have a lot of, hotter summers and colder winters. So Seattle was pretty sleepy back then.
Well, let's get back to these 5 women. Who were they, and what were some of the things that they accomplished?
Yeah, I'd say the first one that probably came along was a woman named Hope Foote, Foote, kind of a funny last name. But she was an interior design professor at the University of Washington. And I think that really most of the architects, of Kirk's age and later that came through the program, the architecture program, did take classes from Hope Foote in the interior design department. Hope Foote was very instrumental in stripping down the kind of traditional Beaux Arts interiors, and she was very interested in clean, simple, easy-to-maintain interiors. So that was really fit in with all the modernist movement that was going on in the 1930s. One of Hope Foote's students was Marjorie Phillips, who was a very talented interior design student, probably wanted to be an architect, but that path just wasn't open to women at the time. And after she got out of school, she had won a national competition on some student design work she had done, and kind of parlayed that into writing for the 2 newspapers here in Seattle, the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, which no longer exists, and of course the Seattle Times. And she was at the Seattle Times for 25 years, and she wrote a weekly column on a new house. This, again, in the post-war years when everyone is, tired of the Depression and they've been through war, and now everyone wants to settle down, buy a house, raise a family. So this is the era of home magazines, Home and Gardens and House Beautiful and Better Homes and Gardens and all those wonderful home magazines. And so Marjorie Phillips was able to really kind of parlay this competition she won into writing for the 2 major newspapers. And she was at the Seattle Times for some 25 years, and her column, her weekly Sunday column, that featured a new house, and it would provide a floor plan of the house, and it would often feature some of the new appliances. And then, of course, she was also writing articles on furniture and the new bells and whistles that were coming online, even if it was just a new vacuum cleaner or new appliances and things like that. And she was instrumental in really picking out a lot of young architects and featuring their modernist work. Paul Hayden Kirk was a frequent person that was featured, and of course a number of others. Really, her work covered the entire Northwest School. And it was, I think, through her work and through her way of presenting these kind of modern traits, if not the entire modernist house, at least modernist traits that got more and more developers to embrace those aesthetics and to kind of look for those cues when they're building a house. Suddenly, modernism wasn't the strange thing it used to be. Now it was really embracing the new and being part of this new age, an atomic age, a post-World War II age, an age of television, and all these new things. And all those things really wanted a modern house to exist in. And these were houses, again, with exposed structure, often post and beam, large expanses of glass, often floor-to-ceiling glass in the living room, and often a floor plan that kind of embraced nature. So rather than having a traditional house where the living room might look out onto the street, the living room would always be faced towards the back of the house where there was a nice garden or where you're looking over a territorial view, because the Puget Sound is very hilly, so almost every lot you buy here has a view of some kind or other.
When you were researching Kirk's projects for the book, how hard was it to find the projects, and are most of them still standing, or do we have a lot that have been destroyed?
Well, it was very interesting because I knew the name of Paul Hayden Kirk, but I really didn't know a lot about him when I took this on. I kind of researched the general field, and it became very important and very clear that he was the premier guy of the time. And what kind of surprised me is that no one wrote a book on him sooner, because he was incredibly prolific and very influential amongst all the architects that came after him. And he designed a lot of key buildings, and some of the key buildings that, if you know even a little bit about our architecture in Seattle, you're probably familiar with the University Unitarian Church, which is a very interesting modernist building, and of course the Magnolia Branch Library, which is a terrific post and beam kind of exposed structure building. Very, very wonderful space. And in researching him, I kind of had these kind of little signposts of buildings that I knew about, but I didn't really know about the range of his work and the progression of his work, which is, I think, quite telling in the book. As you go through it in a chronological manner, you can kind of see how his work evolved. And it was surprisingly difficult to pin down a lot of his work. I'm still trying to find Paul Kirk work. I will still talk to people who see the book and will say, hey, there's a Paul Kirk house a couple of blocks away, and I'll try to add it to the database that has hopefully a real accurate record of everything he designed. Many of these houses have just kind of been forgotten, and many of them, they're kind of hidden behind the trees and bushes and stuff, so unless you really peek down a driveway, you're not going to see that it's a really interesting house. And, of course, many of them, because of the growth in Seattle over recent years, have been torn down. There's a lot of really terrific houses that have been torn down just in the last 10 or 15 years, largely to be replaced by a much larger house. Because a lot of these mid-century houses were modest in size. They were, anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 square feet. I think the biggest house Kirk designed may have been 3,500 square feet. So these smaller houses that were at times meant as even a starter home, they were quickly knocked down and have been replaced. But fortunately, Kirk was so prolific, he was such a hard worker, that there's a lot that are still out there. And there are some, there's the real marquee houses that are still treasured and really treasured by their owners, and in some cases kind of handed down from one generation to the next. I've found a lot of, the children or grandchildren living in the houses that their parents or grandparents had Paul Kirk design. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. You have some people really cherishing their Paul Kirk house, and on the other hand, you have, in many cases, newcomers coming to the region that really, don't embrace that aesthetic, or they want to have a more imposing architectural aesthetic. So they'll build something that's, a bit bigger and grander, and with masonry and a lot of more deluxe materials.
And knocked down one of his houses to do it? I hope
Oh,
not.
yeah. There was a terrific house, on Lake Washington, and it was a grand house. And I thought, that has to still be there. And I found out that they tore it down just 2 years ago.
About how many houses do you think he did in his career? Can you?
Oh, I'd have to say it's in the 500 area.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really up there. And of course, some of those were stock plans he did. So you might see there's a whole, he called it the series homes. So there's series 100, series 200, and so on and so forth on up the numbers. And the series 300 houses were really nice and very successful. And so there's several of those built. There's a lot of them built on the east side and on the west side, and even over across the Puget Sound on the peninsula in Bremerton. It's a very flexible plan. So, and because he designed that and then gave it to a builder, and the builder went out and kind of sold it and built it, there's really no telling how many of those things there are.
Right.
Because only the builder would really know. None of those materials are in Paul Kirk's archive. And he did the same thing with medical clinics. Of course, that was the other kind of big mainstay of his business, was designing these beautiful little medical clinics for the suburbs. And he designed many, many of those, and also had stock plans that a builder would take out to clients and sell them on. So I believe there are even Paul Kirk clinics down in Los Angeles. I've yet to find them if they still exist, but there's records of this builder having built all up and down the West Coast.
We had on architect Jim Olson a while back. He's one of the most famous and successful architects to come out of Seattle, and he did the foreword to your book. Did he know Paul Kirk?
I believe he did meet Paul Kirk on occasion. The interesting story that he tells is that when he was, a teenager and very interested in architecture, and I believe in your interview with him, he mentions the house that his family owned down south on the Key Peninsula, and how he designed a little addition to that house and has kind of added on to it ever since. And just a couple of doors up the coast is a Paul Kirk house, a beautiful house, the Defoe house. And it was on the cover of Sunset Magazine, and it's been in a lot of books. It was very awarded at the time. And, of course, Jim Olson was able to watch the house be built and occasionally talk to Paul Kirk, when he visited the site. Apparently that house had a really great impact on Jim Olson, who really liked the way it was put together. It was a very rational house. It's a lovely house. And it's such a part of the beach that it's set on that it just feels incredibly natural there. And, of course, it's a wonderful house to be in. I was able to talk to the current owners and be able to visit it. And it's a terrific, terrific house. And happily, because it's, well away from the boom of Seattle, happily it's still intact and incredibly well preserved.
Now, this is your first architecture book, right?
Yes, it is.
So with your background in writing and screenwriting, what led you to choose Paul Hayden Kirk as a topic?
Well, yeah, it's kind of a bit of a story, but I grew up in the Northwest, and then I moved to Los Angeles after getting out of college, and I worked in the entertainment industry down there. The first job I had, though, was with the J. Paul Getty Trust. And the Getty at the time was building the Getty Center in Malibu, designed by Richard Meyer, and the Getty Research Institute, for whom I did a lot of marketing and public relations work. They were collecting all kinds of architectural materials, any kind of materials related to the Bauhaus or Italian Futurists or anything like that. If they could find an archive, they'd buy it, because they were assembling this really wonderful library of architectural resources. And, of course, living in Los Angeles, I was surrounded by the kind of architecture I'd never really seen before, having grown up in the Northwest. I mean, there's just off the hook in L.A. There's, Frank Lloyd Wright and Richard Neutra and Lautner and Gregory Ain, and there's all kinds of wonderful, wonderful architecture all over, and it's all very well documented. There's always interesting books I could read or lectures I could go to, museum exhibitions. So I was getting hit with architecture at work and at play and from every direction. It became a real interest and very much a hobby of mine. And when I moved back to Seattle, I was kind of surprised to see that there really wasn't much written about Seattle's mid-century work. There are a few books, but really nothing terribly significant. And oddly enough, nothing on the the premier guy at the time, Paul Hayden Kirk. So I talked to some people who are knowledgeable about architecture in the area, and I talked to some professors at the University of Washington, and they were all rather encouraging. They said, well, no one's done this. If you're already kind of eager to research it, you should just go write something. And so that's what I did. I just kind of gradually started to look at the issue and to see what was available and what was out there. And there is a great collection of Kirk's drawings at the University of Washington. There's a lot of beautiful pictures by another influential woman in the region, Phyllis Dearborn, who was the photographer, the premier architectural photographer of the times. So I thought, well, this will be an easy thing to put together. Of course, that's famous last words, because it was actually very difficult because, unlike any architect of Southern California, where everything's very well documented and people have already written books, so everything's rather processed and easy to gather information on. No one had written about Kirk, so everything was really, I had to track down everything and try to interview as many people as I could find and find as many interviews and quotes with Paul Kirk as I could find. Obviously, he passed away in 1995. So it was a real treasure hunt trying to dig down enough information and locate the houses and find not just the greatest hits of his work, but really look at the whole output and really look at the trajectory of his work in a chronological fashion. And I think there are over 100 projects featured in the book. It's just kind of a march through his work and with some side trips to look at the overall trends of architecture in the Pacific Northwest.
The book is Paul Hayden Kirk and the Rise of Northwest Modern. 260-some pages, really well-researched with some great photos. Thanks for joining us, Dale.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been a pleasure. I thank you for all the help that your website has been. You guys have a fantastic website of magazines that I dove into frequently.
Glad to hear it.
In 1961, the Rat Pack was a group of the coolest cats on the planet. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford toured, they played Vegas, and they made movies, the best of which was the original Ocean's 11. Now, if you've seen the 2001 remake, well, it's good, but it's nothing compared to the original. Sorry, George Clooney. The Rat Pack started meeting at the LA house of Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall with other stars, but eventually it was just Frank, Dean, and Sammy. They captivated audiences for a decade, and later Dean Martin would draw on them and their many friends for the hilarious Dean Martin Celebrity Roasts you can see on YouTube. Watching Don Rickles and Foster Brooks and Bob Newhart yuck it up with a panel of clearly inebriated stars is still hilarious.
And we are over the Moon River here today to have Dean Martin's daughter, Deana Martin, on the program. She followed her dad's footsteps to pursue a career in music and acting and starred on Broadway in plays such as Star-Spangled Girl, Wait Until Dark, and The Tunnel of Love. She's appeared on TV many times and has a very popular Friday night show on the internet. Her album Destination Moon offered a distinctive take on jazz and pop classics, including True Love, a duet with her father. Her latest album, Swing Street, includes some of the best Hollywood musicians, and she's also an airplane pilot. Deana and her husband, John, live in Beverly Hills and Branson, Missouri. Welcome, Deana.
Well, thank you very much. What a very nice introduction.
Well, Deana, before we get started, I got to ask, why Branson? Did you build a theater there at some point, like Jim Stafford or Tony Orlando? I think you'd build like a theater in Palm Springs.
I should have, although it's a little warm there.
True.
I love
That
Palm
is
Springs.
true.
We have the house there on Via Monte Vista. I remember going there, of course, all the time, especially at Easter. Easter time, it was just so much fun there. But Branson, we got a place in Branson because when I was doing my Christmas album, White Christmas, I had wanted Andy Williams. He actually agreed to do a song with me, a duet with me, on my White Christmas album. I came here to talk to him, and you know what? It was when I came to visit Andy Williams, when we came here, we went to the Moon River Theater because he was doing a show, And it was just so beautiful. And he said, well, why don't you move here? There's a house, across the first fairway here that's for sale. He ended up doing the recording with me, and it was the last recording he ever made. And it's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, wow.
It's absolutely beautiful. You have to listen to it, because at the very end, I say, well, Merry Christmas, Andy. And he says, Merry Christmas, Deana. And I want to die every time I hear it. It's just so, we always hear him singing. But when he's, Merry Christmas, Deana, it's very special.
That's
and Christmas
sweet.
is coming up.
Yep.
So that's why we have this house here. My husband thought I was nuts. But it's, we're right on the golf course. And, so it's nice. The people are very, very sweet here. And it's quiet.
Oh, yes. Branson's a really nice place to live.
Yeah, it is.
Now, Deana, when did you first perform on TV with your dad? Was it in 1966 on one of his specials?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was so maybe it was before that. It was when I was recorded my first record, with Jimmy Bowen and Lee Hazelwood. It was country. So it had to be 66, I would think, the first time I was on with Dad. And then we had the great Christmas special with my Uncle Frank Sinatra. I think even Uncle Sammy Davis Jr. showed up. So
all in the family.
All in the family, absolutely.
Now, people still know your dad for his music, of course, but many people don't know about your dad's Matt Helm movies, which were really pretty good.
Oh, he was so cute as Matt Helm. He really was. And, the way he wore the little turtleneck and the blazer, he was so fantastic. But he was a fabulous actor. When I think about some of those movies he was in, like The Young Lions with Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift, he was brilliant. And Rio Bravo, I'm still upset that he wasn't nominated for Best Supporting Role. He was magnificent in that movie. And also in Ada Dallas and Some Came Running with Uncle Frank and Shirley MacLaine, he did some incredible acting. But he was cute as Matt Helm.
Yeah, how many of those did he did? Like 4 or 5?
I think 4. I think they were slated to do 5, and I don't know why they didn't do the last one. But they were always just, fun to see, and I would go down and visit him on the set. He had fun doing them because he didn't have a lot of lines, but he had a lot of double takes.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah. He loved doing that. And he was just, he was a doll. So, and I'm trying to think what years that was that the 60s, 70s? Let me see.
That was 60s. I think he did one a little bit later on.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so.
I bet he was a blast of the craft services tent.
Oh, yeah.
Holding
he was
court.
a blast. He was a blast everywhere. And I know at home at 601 Mountain Drive, so I had 6 brothers and sisters, and, the big house on Mountain Drive, and it was a beautiful, beautiful home. But he would come in. He was home every night. If he wasn't, in Las Vegas doing his show at, one of the fabulous casinos there, and if he wasn't making a movie, he was home every night, for dinner, like 5:30, 6 o'clock. You would hear him walk in the back door because he didn't have tabs on his shoes, but there was something. You could hear him walk in. He'd walk into the kitchen and get a piece of Wonder Bread and put a little butter on it and walk into the den in the living room and kiss us. Then he'd sit down at the bar with my mom and have a cocktail, and he'd have a little drinky poo. Of course, now on my show, and so on my show on Fridays, I have a little sippy poo.
Do you have the Wonder Bread and butter?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, but I still remember that loaf of Wonder Bread. It was white and had those like little circles on it with blue and red and green.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And he would just fold it over. I'm thinking, here he is. He just liked that. That was his little snack. Then he'd go down and have a half hour or an hour with Jeannie, our mom, and they would talk over what happened during that day. And then we would come in and bug him, and we'd have dinner. It was a great place to grow up and have all these people. I would come downstairs sometimes, and it's Sammy Kahn sitting at the piano writing parodies for my dad.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've sewn a costume to her face. Yeah. Just really cute things. So, I was very blessed to learn from the very best about music and and style and class, because they were all classy. It was just a thrill for me to be around them. Imagine Christmas Eve, I'm sitting there with Rosemary Clooney singing Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. It was just mind-boggling how fantastic my childhood was to be able to sing with these incredible people. So I learned well. I learned from the best.
And we're going to hear a little bit of that now. This is Deana singing Beyond the Sea It was a French hit written about the ocean, but Jack Lawrence rewrote it into an English-language love song that was huge for Bobby Darin in 1959, reaching number 6 on the Billboard 100. It's been covered by George Benson, Robbie Williams, Barry Manilow, and of course Kevin Spacey playing Bobby Darin in the biopic. Here's Deana with Beyond the Sea from her album Destination Moon.
Somewhere beyond the sea, somewhere waiting for me, my lover stands on golden sands and watches the ships that go sailing. Somewhere beyond the sea, he's there watching for me. If I could fly like birds on high, then straight to his arms I'd go sailing. It's far beyond the stars, it's near beyond the moon. I know beyond a doubt my heart will lead me there soon, and we'll meet beyond the shore. We're gonna kiss just as before, and happy we'll be beyond the sea, and never again will I go sailing. I know beyond a doubt my heart will lead me there soon, and we'll meet, I know we'll meet beyond the shore. We're gonna kiss just as before, and happy we'll be beyond the sea, and never again will I go sailing. No more sailing, so long sailing, bye-bye sailing, goodbye aqua, no more sailing.
What a great song. So bouncy.
Isn't that a great song?
Yeah.
Wow.
And a nice job singing it, too.
Well, thank you very much. And it was, a really nice arrangement by Charlie Colello. And of course, we have my Rick Creevy, my music director, on piano, and Eddie Mena on sax. But we had, great musicians, of course. So that's what we like to do. And it's all about constructing a great record.
Now, during the 60s and early 70s, did you and Nancy Sinatra and Frank Sinatra Jr. ever perform or consider going on the road? Kind of like you could have been the first Brat Pack before the movie came out.
It's true. We were the Brat Pack. You're absolutely right. We hadn't thought about doing it. We were all, doing our own things at the time.
Okay.
And so everybody had their own careers. What we were doing, we were all friends, of course, and we did the Dean Martin show a few times. It was a fun time, and I think there was a number where it was Lucy Jr. and Frank Jr. and myself. We had fun on the show. And then the Christmas show, of course. But we have not thought about going out together. We did not think about going out and doing it together. We talked about it.
Yeah.
But everybody was busy doing their own thing.
That would have been a great concert.
Wouldn't that have been fun? Yeah, it would have. And, I did things with Nancy, of course, and I did things with Frank and with Liza and, and Lorna. So, just imagine.
All first names that you don't have to fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
It's a first name
I have
basis.
to tell you, in 60, I'm trying to think, it was 67, probably, in 1967, and I think it was Julie Stein who had asked us, and he put together, it was called Chips Off the Old Block, or The Name's the Same. And it was Maureen Reagan, Mickey Rooney Jr., Gary Lewis, Deana Martin, Francesca Hilton, who couldn't do a thing, poor Francesca, and Meredith McRae. And we did this show at Caesars, and it was really quite something. until we found out that Peter Lorre Jr. was not Peter Lorre Jr. because he didn't have a Peter Lorre Jr. So, I mean, it was kind of a fun show. But when you would drive up to Caesars and you'd see the huge marquee, in big letters it said Martin and Lewis.
Yeah.
and as you get closer, you can see there's a teeny little Deana above the Martin and a little Gary, over the Lewis. And it was Martin and Lewis together again. It was a fun show.
Now, our ACE research team came up with a little known factoid about you, which I found fascinating, is that at some point you dated Davy Jones of the Monkees?
Oh, Davy, yes. Oh, he was... Oh, I have some great stories
how
about
adorable that was, that guy.
He was so cute. We were the same size. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a bit petite.
He was an incredible entertainer. And when he would come over to the house, my dad just adored him because he loved horses. So did my dad. They had the same sense of humor. And we would all go outside, and I'll never forget this. It was one of I'm pretty sure it was embarrassing for him, but he didn't care. Those were in the days of hip huggers and bell bottoms.
Yeah,
and he would wear his little boots. So we all went outside to the backyard to play football, because, 6 kids, 7 kids. And so he took off his shoes to play football, and he was tripping over his pants.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. No, we rolled him up for him. But it was
nice
stupid.
of you.
What a good guy, and I remained friends with him forever. And in fact, one of the last songs, he was doing a show at the Arcada in Chicago, and I went to see him. My handsome husband John and I went to see him, and I surprised him. I came out on stage; he didn't know, and I sang "Everybody Loves Somebody" to him, and it was quite something. And he looked at me and he sang "Secret Love" to me. It was just, spectacular.
Wow.
It was one of his last performances also. We were shocked because he was in good shape and he was riding every day, and I love his daughters, and so
he wasn't that old.
He wasn't that old. I mean, he looked fantastic, and as I say, he was just a really good guy, a nice guy with a good sense of humor, and John and I just adored him. So what a shame. But he was my boyfriend.
And how are Angie Dickinson and Shirley MacLaine doing? Have you ever had them over to one of your Friday night parties?
Well, they always came over. And in fact, Angie, we have put together a documentary, a Dean Martin documentary. And we've been working on it for years. We were kind of put on hold for this past year. But I have to tell you, we interviewed Angie. Mm-hmm. Also, we got Florence Henderson.
Oh, great.
So that was great. We got Bob Newhart, Norman Lear, Alec Bald. I mean, everybody wanted to talk about Dad, of course. And they all have their, stories about him. And that will be coming out, I think, before Christmas. Same with the PBS special. But we were able to interview all of these people. And Shirley MacLaine, it was funny. She said she came over one day because she was just in love with Dad. And then she said she saw all the kids, and she said, no, I can't put up with this. So, and Angie is still a very, very good friend. And we see her when we go out into Beverly Hills.
Well, this song, which is one of my personal favorites, was written by fellow Rat Packer Jimmy Van Heusen. It appeared in the original Ocean's 11, and although it wasn't one of Dean Martin's biggest hits, it squarely captures some of the magic of that era. Here's Deana with Ain't That a Kick in the Head.
How lucky can one gal be? I kissed him and he kissed me. Like my daddy once said, ain't that a kick in the head? The room was completely black. I hugged him and he hugged back. Like the sailor said, quote, ain't that a hole in the boat? My head keeps spinning. I go to sleep or keep grinning. If this is just the beginning, my life is gonna be beautiful as sunshine enough to spread. It's just like the fella said. Tell me quick, ain't love a kick in the head? fella once said, ain't that a kick in the head? Like the sailor said, quote, ain't that a hole in the boat? My head keeps spinning, I go to sleep, I keep grinning. If this is just the beginning, my life is gonna be beautiful. He's telling me we'll be wed. He's picked out a king-size bed. I couldn't feel any better, or I'd be sick. Tell me quick, I love a kick. Tell me quick, I love a kick in the head.
That's the song you want playing by the pool when the martinis are served.
That's exactly right. We'll have a little sippy poo.
Exactly.
So cute. You know, I mean, and that's from my first album, I think in 2006. But boy, you know, to have Uncle Frank and Uncle Sammy and all those people, you know, that I grew up with and, you know, would hang out with. It was just quite something. But Sammy Kahn and Jimmy Van Heusen writing that song, and boy, it's been in everything. You know, when I think about it, it's in commercials, and it's just, you know, I can't tell you how many people use that as their wedding march or something. You know, they're getting married. It's really quite a cool song.
Deana, where can people find your Friday night parties?
Oh, go to DeanaMartin.com. And, you know, so they can, you know, find it on Facebook or YouTube. Now, Deana is Dean with an A. It's DEANA, Martin.com. Some people put in 2 N's, but that's kind of like Deana.
Yeah.
But this is Dean with an A. And, yeah, go to my website, and they can, it's a fun website anyways, you know, because I have a lot of things on there, but they go to Facebook, Deana Martin Facebook, and I also have, I think I have a Deana Martin Memories Are Made of This Facebook page. You know, that's from my book, Memories Are Made of This, Dean Martin Through His Daughter's Eyes. But they can find it. Just make sure they spell my name right, and they'll find me. That's
DEANA. Hey, thanks so much for joining us, Deana. This has been a blast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very, very much, and I'll be listening from now on.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin, and by Modernist realtor Angela Roll. Okay, Tom, close us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 8,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino researches guests while encouraging her daughters to enroll in the Capital City Girls Choir. She's hoping for another Taylor Swift. And the cycle of life continues. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a non-profit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another Ain't That a Kick in the Head edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.